Good evening, my dear listeners. I hope you're excited for tonight's tale as much as I am. It begins not in the clamor of war, but in the quiet of a German schoolhouse in the kingdom of Württemberg, where a field marshal who would become legendary was once just a boy, Erwin Johannes Erwin Rommel. Born in November 1891, his father, also named Erwin, was a mathematics teacher, and young Rommel, gifted with a sharp intellect, was keenly interested in mathematics and engineering. Indeed, his highest ambition in his teenage years was simply to follow his father's footsteps as a teacher, or perhaps become an engineer. Yet destiny had other plans for this middle-class son. His lineage was unremarkable by the standards of the German military elite. He did not belong to the entrenched military aristocracy, the generals whose fathers and grandfathers had been generals before them. He was an outsider, a common man, who would rise purely on merit and ambition. It was in 1910 that he entered the infantry college, marking the first step on a path that would make him one of the most famous and most complicated figures of the Second World War. The true crucible for the young officer was the Western Front in World War I. It was here, amidst the horrors of the Great War, that Rommel honed his ferocious, hands-on and utterly unorthodox style of leadership. He became renowned for practicing command by example, advancing at the head of his troops, leading not from the safe confines of a rear headquarters, but directly from the front lines, close to the fire and smoke. This high-risk behavior saw him wounded 6 times during the war. Rommel specialized in the newly emerging Stoßtruppen, or shock troop, tactics. These were methods rooted in speed, deception, and achieving deep penetration into enemy lines to overwhelm the defense. He learned how to utilize small groups of men to simulate attacks from anticipated directions, forcing the enemy to focus their defenses, while the main assault maneuvered onto the flanks or rear for a decisive surprise. This audacious method often broke the enemy's will, leading to surrenders that spared unnecessary casualties and expenditure of ammunition. His effectiveness in applying these innovative tactics was undeniable. He was highly decorated and achieved the prestigious Pour le Mérite for his actions on the Italian front. He consistently commanded more men and won more victories than his eventual adversary, Montgomery, over the course of the war, and ascended the ranks at a meteoric pace. After the war, his field experience served as the foundation for his classic book on military tactics, Infanterie greift an, Infantry Attacks, published in 1937. This book, written in a dynamic style distinct from contemporary German military literature, became a bestseller, outlining his unorthodox methods, even discussing the inconsistencies he perceived in the military system. The publication of Infantry Attacks was not merely a career milestone, it was a pivot point in Rommel's destiny. The book helped persuade Adolf Hitler to give Rommel a position of high command, a remarkable feat considering Rommel was not of the traditional Prussian military aristocracy. Rommel's early attitude towards Hitler was nothing short of worshipful. Although he was never an official member of the Nazi Party, he welcomed the Nazi seizure of power and, according to some assessments, was ideologically sound. A true National Socialist, although his devotion did not extend to the racial policies. He saw Hitler as a bulwark against Bolshevism and, like many officers encouraged by Hitler, mistakenly believed the military was the most critical element of the regime. Hitler was impressed with Rommel's talents and in 1939 appointed him commander of his personal guard during the invasion of Poland. This direct proximity to the dictator provided him with unparalleled access and allowed him to attend Hitler's daily war briefings. Rommel proudly documented these moments in letters to his wife. The dictator elevated Rommel over more senior officers, a clear sign of favoritism that added to the growing distrust Rommel experienced from the traditional German high command. Though honored to guard the Führer, Rommel chafed at the relatively static role His true opportunity came in 1940, when he was granted command of the 7th Panzer Division for the invasion of France. Having had ample time to study the new Blitzkrieg armored cavalry rushes during the Polish campaign, Rommel applied this lightning-fast mechanized warfare with devastating effect. Rommel, with his unit, demonstrated extraordinary prowess. He embraced the principles of maneuver, speed, and surprise inherent in Blitzkrieg, which was an evolutionary, not revolutionary development in German tactical doctrine, intended to achieve rapid annihilation, Vernichtungsgedanke, by encirclement, Kesselschlachten. Excuse my German. I haven't spoken it since I was 32. I am 76, by the way, if anyone is wondering. So Rommel used armored tank units heavily to penetrate enemy lines, a strategy that led to phenomenal success on the French mainland, reaching Paris in a matter of days. His tactical audacity was so immense that, according to some authors, his recklessness even benefited the German cause and effectively invented the application of Blitzkrieg in practice. Less than a year later, Rommel, promoted and celebrated, was given command of the Afrika Korps, tasked with supporting the faltering Italian forces in Libya against the British and Commonwealth forces. His mission was initially defensive, to prevent the Axis from losing North Africa entirely, an emergency measure to prevent Mussolini's government from collapsing. Hitler's strategic aim for the theater was limited, focusing mainly on protecting his southern flank, while the main effort was directed against the Soviet Union. North Africa was merely a sideshow to the true war in the East. Rommel was explicitly authorized only to conduct limited attacks, pushing the British back merely to El Agheila. But Rommel, the impulsive tactician, could not abide by timid plans. He was aggressive, quick-thinking, and offensive-minded. He disdained the traditional German general staff, believing their formal education limited their creativity. Upon realizing his British opponents were relatively new to desert fighting, poorly equipped and poorly trained, he saw a decisive opportunity to drive the British out of Egypt entirely. Rommel saw desert fighting as resembling warfare at sea, characterized by unrestricted maneuver in the vastness, allowing forces to appear, attack, and disappear rapidly. Throughout the North African campaign, the disparity between German organizational philosophy and the Allied approach became starkly evident. The Germans retained their cohesive regimental structures, conditioning leaders to maneuver units as an integrated whole, allowing them to strike fragmented British formations with massed force. In Operation Crusader, November 1941, Rommel faced Allied forces that technically outnumbered his tanks by nearly 2-1. Yet the British wasted this material advantage by scattering their brigades across the desert against widely separated objectives, committing them piecemeal into battle. Rommel concentrated his 15th and 21st Panzer divisions, forming task forces built around their cohesive panzer regiments, and hammered the scattered British and Commonwealth units in succession. Rommel summarized the British failure perfectly. What is the use of having overall superiority if one allows one's formations to be smashed piece by an enemy who in each separate action is able to concentrate superior strength at the decisive point? Similarly, during the Battle of Gazala, May 1942, Rommel's cohesive formations achieved tactical superiority, exploiting the British preference for fighting their brigades and battalions as isolated, separate entities, committing them incrementally. His rapid advance was so effective, it rolled over the British 4th Armoured Brigade and overran the 7th Armoured Division headquarters. These campaigns solidified Rommel's reputation for military genius. Even Winston Churchill, addressing the British defeats, praised Rommel as an extraordinarily bold and clever opponent and a great field commander. Yet here lies the great paradox, the core of Rommel's ultimate failure. His genius was purely tactical, divorced from operational reality. Rommel was an executor and a brilliant tactician, but he was ill-prepared for the tasks of an operational commander. He failed to grasp the significance of time, space, means, and political aims at the operational and strategic levels. When he proposed a general offensive to seize all of Egypt in March 1941, the High Command rejected it as unsupportable. When questioned about how he would sustain such an attack deep into Egypt, his chillingly pragmatic reply betrayed his operational blindness. "That's quite immaterial to me. That's your pigeon." Rommel's aggressive opportunism led to many battlefield victories, often against inferior odds, but it also led to an inefficient use of the Axis power's limited national resources. His reliance on tactical victories, what military theorists call the tacticization of strategy, failed to support the strategic and operational aims of the Axis powers. The lack of a feasible and supportable campaign plan, one that linked the tactical successes to a defined political end state, doomed the Axis forces. His brilliant tactical conduct in North Africa ultimately had an adverse effect on the Axis war effort. Rommel's success was not only a military phenomenon, but a spectacular propaganda success. The myth of Rommel, the mythos Rommel, was born. Nazi propaganda, spearheaded by Joseph Goebbels, seized upon Rommel, the non-aristocratic, highly competent commander, to instill public optimism and praise the Wehrmacht. Goebbels intended to elevate Rommel to a kind of popular hero. Rommel, with his innate love of the spotlight, willingly cooperated. The German media covered him more frequently than any other commander, using his victories to distract the German public from the disasters unfolding on the Eastern Front. Crucially, the Allies, particularly the British press, enthusiastically promoted the legend. This praise was politically expedient for figures like Churchill, who found it useful to portray Rommel as a virtual Superman to justify the humiliating British defeats and setbacks in North Africa. It was better for public perception to be defeated by a brilliant enemy than due to incompetence or lack of readiness among the higher-ups. After the war, this image evolved into the Rommel myth, portraying him as the good German or our friend Rommel, an apolitical chivalrous genius and a victim of the Third Reich. This interpretation was essential for the post-war efforts to rehabilitate the image of the Wehrmacht, the clean Wehrmacht myth, and facilitate West German rearmament during the Cold War. Foundational texts, particularly Desmond Young's biography, Rommel, The Desert Fox, 1950, and The Rommel Papers, 1953, edited by B. H. Liddell Hart, cemented this heroic narrative, praising his conduct of war without hate. Liddell Hart, indeed, used the Rommel Papers to retroactively position Rommel as his pupil in armored warfare theory, thereby boosting his own reputation. However, the historical record demands sobriety. Rommel's celebrated reputation for conducting a clean war is contested. Some instances of ill treatment and summary execution of French prisoners occurred under the command of his 7th Panzer Division during the campaign against France, while the relatively sparsely populated desert areas limited the opportunities for the systematic ethnic cleansing seen elsewhere. Historians point to Rommel's complicity as a loyal servant of the regime, and accusations exist regarding the ill treatment of Jewish people in North Africa. Rommel, fundamentally, was a complicated figure who was ruthless when required. Rommel's successes in 1941 and early 1942 pushed him to the cusp of Egypt, but the strategic tide was turning, hastened by logistical exhaustion. His forces had expended enormous effort to thrust deep into enemy territory. The situation became critical at the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942. Rommel faced General Bernard Montgomery, Rommel's Allied counterpart. Montgomery, an equally stubborn and highly skilled general, had arrived to establish order, discipline, and proper training in the British 8th Army, backed by significantly superior resources, including new tanks, guns, and troops. While Rommel inflicted heavy casualties in almost every battle, Montgomery was able to absorb these losses due to his immense strategic advantage in resources. outnumbering Rommel's troops by tens of thousands and possessing superior armor and artillery. Rommel had hoped for a quick victory, perhaps aided by German success at Stalingrad, but this hope never materialized. He was forced into battle knowing he was backed into a corner with reduced German funding for the North African theater. The defeat at Alamein was a catastrophic turning point, marking the first major Allied victory and the beginning of the end for the Axis in North Africa. Rommel, unable to hold his ground, began a prolonged withdrawal. While German propaganda depicted these retreats as tactical and glorious, Rommel was eventually forced to withdraw entirely, having lost the initiative and his army. He returned to Germany defeated, believing the defeat at Alamein was the beginning of the end of Nazism. After the defeat in Africa, Rommel was initially placed in charge of inspecting and organizing the coastal defenses along the Atlantic Wall, Hitler's Festung Europa or Fortress Europe. This defensive role ran counter to his nature as an aggressive, offensive field commander. It was during this time that his disillusionment with Hitler and the war intensified. He began criticizing German leadership and questioning the war's feasibility. Rommel came to understand that the war was lost due to the overwhelming material superiority of the Allies. This period coincided with the military resistance movement against Hitler. Because of Rommel's immense popularity, conspirators attempted to recruit him, hoping his presence would lend crucial legitimacy to a post-Hitler regime and prevent the emergence of a new stab-in-the-back myth. Rommel was certainly aware of the plot. He even drafted an ultimatum telegram to Hitler, demanding an end to the war and threatening to throw open the Western Front if rejected. However, Rommel held a fundamental ideological objection to the central tactic of the conspiracy: assassination. He feared that killing Hitler would turn the dictator into a martyr and risk sparking a civil war. Rommel preferred to see Hitler arrested and tried for his crimes. While his involvement remains ambiguous, he was not actively involved in the planning of the July 20th plot and was not aware of the date. He was certainly more than a mere sympathizer. Before the full extent of his potential participation could be realized, disaster struck. On July 17, 1944, Rommel was seriously wounded when Allied aircraft strafed his staff car in Normandy. Just 3 days later, the attempt on Hitler's life failed. The Gestapo dragnet, spurred by confessions obtained under torture, soon implicated Rommel. Yet Hitler faced a dilemma. Executing the nation's most celebrated hero would be a clear demonstration of the regime's failure. Rommel, the child of Goebbels' propaganda machine, was too valuable, even in death. On October 14, 1944, Generals Ernst Maesel and Wilhelm Burgdorf arrived at Rommel's home with an ultimatum. Rommel had two choices: face trial for high treason, which would result in his disgrace and execution and the persecution of his family, or commit suicide immediately by cyanide pill in exchange for assurances that his reputation and family would be spared. Rommel chose to protect his loved ones. He told his son Manfred, "To die by the hand of one's own people is hard, but the house is surrounded by German troops. I have been given the opportunity to die by poison." He left his home, still wearing his Afrika Korps jacket and carrying his Field Marshal's baton. Minutes later, he was dead. To maintain morale and preserve the hero myth, Rommel was given a lavish state funeral. The official story fed to the German public was that the Desert Fox had succumbed to his war injuries. Hitler, unaware of the full details of the death, sent Field Marshal von Rundstedt as his representative. It wasn't until after the war that the truth of his forced suicide was revealed. Rommel's story remains steeped in ambiguity. He was a man of contradictions. He was a brilliant tactician, an impressive military commander, a pioneer of mobile warfare, yet strategically deficient, unable to properly link his battlefield opportunism to the overarching political goals of his nation. He was loyal to Hitler and the vision of a strong German empire, Yet he was also willing to disobey orders, including Hitler's explicit directives to hold ground to the last man in North Africa. He became the face of the clean Wehrmacht, a romantic archetype of the medieval knight, yet he willingly benefited from the regime's propaganda machine, and his command history carries stains of ruthlessness. The memory of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, continues to persist today, especially abroad. In modern Germany, while Rommel's name is recognized, sometimes even lending itself to the German army's largest military base, many ordinary Germans express indifference toward military prowess displayed in the service of the Nazi regime. But the legend itself, the perception of him as a gentleman warrior, military genius, and anti-Nazi martyr, has proven remarkably resilient. The legacy of Erwin Rommel is a potent reminder that history often prefers a clean, compelling legend over a messy, uncomfortable truth.